So today it's time to install some polyurethane suspension bushings. But before that, I'm going to do something I haven't done in a long time, and that's to play my intro. So how do you install a bunch of polyurethane suspension bushings into your suspension components? Well, I'll be honest with you, installing the bushings into your suspension is the easy part. The hard part is getting to this stage where you're actually installing the bushings. Now, I have said this before, and I'm gonna say it again. I have removed the engine from my MR2 and then installed it twice. I did it on my own, and that's supposed to be let's say, a hard task. Removing all of my suspension components from the car was a million times harder. It was the single most physically and mentally demanding thing I have ever done, when working on a car. If you have a old or oldish car that has, rust issues, they are going to be very much present on your suspension because your suspension is exposed to the elements. So be prepared for war when it comes to removing suspension from an older car with some rust on it. I highly recommend a good professional grade impact gun. I know it's a pricey investment, but it's gonna be really, really worth it. Trust me, you'll never regret it. Don't buy cheap impact guns because your own two hands, no matter how skinny they are better than a cheap impact gun. They don't do anything. Get a good one, and also get a lot of penetrant. Don't buy a can, buy 5 cans. If you have a newer car, newish car that doesn't have rust issues, removing suspension components it is pretty much straightforward. You just remove some nuts and some bolts and you're done. Now, even with the impact gun and a lot of penetrant, you might be facing situations on an older rusty car where you will have to cut off bolts. I did that, and you might have to do that, so also have some sort of cutting tool handy, for horrible situations like that. Now, once the suspension is off the car, the next step is to remove the old OEM rubber bushings. Now, removing the rubber bushings is very easy if you have a shop press or access to a shop press. It's a 10-minute job, but even if you don't have a press, you can remove them relatively easily by using a gear pour. I myself removed all of my old rubber bushings by using a gear pour, and I made a little video about it. So if you want to see the full video on how to remove old rubber bushings by using a gear pour, just click in that corner right there. Now, once you have removed all of your old rubber bushings, you are pretty much at the stage where you can install your new polyurethane ones. But before that, I did another extra step, and that is that I blasted and powder coated my suspension. I definitely recommend doing that as a future investment because it's going to go a long way in preventing future rust. It's going to make suspension adjustments a lot easier and nicer, and it's just going to make working on your car a lot more comfortable because it's going to prevent rust flakes from falling into your eyes every time you get underneath the car. So with all of that done, let's see all the suspension components and let's see their each individual polyurethane bushings. So here we have our front torque arms and their bushings. Here we have our front control arms and their bushings. This is the grease that comes with the bushings. This is very important. Here we have our rear torque arms and their bushings. So these ones go here and these ones go here. Some more grease. Here we have the rear control arms and their bushings. As you have probably noticed, the prothane polyurethane suspension bushings come in two parts. Now this is very much different to the OEM rubber bushings, and this is what makes the install super simple. So what you want to do is get your suspension component and put it in a vise. Once it's in the vise, inspect the inside of the metal sleeve where the bushing is going to sit. In my case, this part of my suspension component wasn't blasted or powder coated, so there is some rust and imperfections inside. What you can do is get some sandpaper and simply sand away all the nastiness so the surface is reasonably smooth for the bushing to sit on. You're really not aiming for a mirror finish here, so you do not need to overdo it. Reasonably smooth is good enough. And when it comes to the part of my control arm where the torque arm bushings sit, the rust did a lot more damage here, and there's a lot more imperfections. And in this case, sandpaper wasn't enough, so what I did is I took a grinding tool, an air grinder to be precise, and grinded this area back into shape. Once I have ground away all the nastiness, I used some heavy-duty wax to prevent, rust forming here again in the future. Once the rust is gone and removed, you can proceed to install the bushing. The most important part when it comes to installing prothane polyurethane bushings is to lube them up properly. Prothane provides some super grease with all of the bushings they sell. It comes in the packaging, and you want to lube up pretty much all the surfaces of the bushings. I like to lube up the outer diameter, the inner diameter of the bushing, as well as the faces of the bushing, because all of those parts are going to be contacting some other surfaces. I also like to lube up the pin that goes right inside of the bushing. Once that is done, sometimes the strength of your hands might be enough to install the bushing and the pin, but in most cases you are going to need to use a vise. This is really simple. Just put the bushings onto the suspension component and put them in a vise, and then tighten the vise, and everything is just going to fall into place. It's really simple as that. And this is why I said that the install of the bushings themselves really isn't that complicated. When it comes to the install of the torque arm bushings, what you want to do again is take your torque arm and put it in a vise. I then like to lube up the threads of the torque arm with some assembly lube to prevent, seizing in the future and make future suspension adjustments easier. Once you have lubed it up, simply put the bottom nut on, then put the bottom little plate thing on, then lube up your bushings. When it comes to the torque arm bushings, it's really important to lube the faces. The sides don't really do much, the outer diameter doesn't really do much, just to lube up the faces of the bushing, but you can lube up the inside and everything else. It really can't do any harm. The lube is really nice, it stays on there and it's really good. Once you have lubed up the first half of the bushing, put the pin in there, the metal pin, then put the control arm there, then put the other half of the bushing on there, also lube up the other half, then put the top plate on, and then put the top nut on and tighten everything down. And once you have done that, once you've tightened it to the proper torque specs, you can simply install everything back on the car the same way it came off the car, and you are pretty much done with the install of all of your suspension bushings. And there you have it. As I said, installing the bushings is pretty simple. Their design makes the install pretty much a breeze, and to be honest, a pretty enjoyable task when you compare it to the removal of the suspension from the car and the removal of the old rubber bushings. That is the hard part, and installing the polyurethane bushing really comes down to just a few simple tasks and not forgetting to use, the lube on the bushings. And that's it. I hope you liked the video. I hope you found it useful. If you have any sort of questions, of course, as always, feel free to ask in the comments section of the video. When it comes to polyurethane suspension bushings, there will be more content in the future. Once the car is finally moving, I will be doing a review video of the bushings and giving you, some impressions of how I think they behave when it comes to driving the car in different conditions. So that's pretty much it for today. As always, don't forget to share, like, comment and subscribe, and I'll be seeing you soon on the D4A channel.